In a quiet coastal town where the wind always smelled like salt and old memories, there was a small bookshop called Wren and Tide. It stood between a faded bakery and a closed-down cinema, its wooden sign creaking whenever the weather changed its mind. Inside the shop worked a man named Adrian. He was not young, but not old either, somewhere in that uncertain middle where time begins to feel less like a line and more like a circle you keep walking around. Adrian loved books the way some people love music or distant cities he had never visited, but more than anything, he loved writing letters he never sent. Every evening, after closing the shop, he would sit behind the counter with a pen and cream-colored paper. He wrote to people he had lost touch with, to versions of himself that might have existed in different choices, and sometimes, to someone he never had the courage to speak to. Her name was Eliza. Eliza had once worked in the bakery next door. She used to come into the bookshop every morning, always pretending she wasn't there for him, only for books. She would tap her fingers on the counter while waiting, as if impatient with the world itself, and ask him for recommendations she almost never followed. Adrian had known from the beginning that he was falling in love with her. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but slowly, like ink spreading through water. One winter, Eliza stopped coming. At first, he told himself she was busy. Then he told himself she had moved. Eventually, he stopped telling himself anything at all. But the letters continued. Years passed. The bakery closed. The cinema became a storage space. The town grew quieter, as if it too had learned to grieve. And still, Adrian wrote. One night, during a storm that shook the windows of Wren and Tide, he wrote the longest letter he had ever written. Eliza, I don't know where you are, or if you remember me at all. But I remember you in small pieces, your laugh when you thought I said something clever, the way you always chose books by their covers even though you denied it, the cold mornings when your hands were always warmer than mine. I think I loved you without ever saying it properly. And maybe that's the problem. Some things don't survive silence. If you ever come back, I will try to say it out loud this time. He folded the letter and placed it in a box under the counter. Like all the others. One spring morning, years later, the bell above the shop door rang. Adrian looked up, expecting a customer, but instead saw someone standing there as if she had stepped out of a memory that had finally decided to return. Eliza. She looked older, of course. People always do, but her eyes were the same, curious, slightly tired, and impossibly familiar. I walked past this street by accident, she said, as if explaining why fate had made a mistake. Adrian forgot how to speak for a moment. Then he said her name, quietly, like testing whether it was still real. She smiled. I used to come here a lot, she said. I remember, he replied. There was a pause, not awkward, just full. Eliza walked slowly between the shelves, brushing her fingers along the spines of books like greeting old friends. Then she stopped. Do you still write letters? She asked suddenly. Adrian hesitated. Yes, he said. But I never send them. She turned toward him. That seems like a waste, she said gently. Something inside him shifted then, not dramatically, but enough to feel like a door unlocking after years of rust. He walked to the counter, took out the box, and placed it between them. There's one for you, he said. Her expression changed, not shock, not sadness, but something softer. Something like recognition. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she looked at him and said, I think I always knew. They sat there for a long time, surrounded by books and dust and light that fell like quiet forgiveness through the windows. Outside, the sea kept moving, as it always had. And inside Wren and Tide, a letter that was never meant to be sent finally found its way into the hands it was written for. After that day, something in Adrian's life changed, though at first it was almost invisible. The shop was still the same. The bell still rang the same. The sea still whispered against the shore like it had nothing better to do than repeat itself forever. But Adrian was no longer the same man who had written letters in silence. Eliza began coming back. Not every day. Not even often. but enough that the world started to feel slightly less like a memory and more like something unfinished. At first, their conversations were careful, like walking on ice that might crack at any moment. "How long have you been back in town?" Adrian asked one afternoon. 2 months, she said. "And you only came here now?" Eliza smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure I was allowed to." Adrian didn't understand what she meant, but he didn't ask. Instead, he started saving her favorite books again, without being asked. One evening, rain fell so heavily it sounded like the sky was trying to erase everything underneath it. Eliza stayed late in the shop. "You never sent them," she said, holding one of the letters from the box. "No," Adrian replied. "Why?" He looked at the floor, then at her. "Because I was afraid the answer would be worse than the silence." Eliza sat down on the counter as if she belonged there. "That's funny," she said softly. "I left because I thought you didn't care enough to speak." The air between them changed. Not suddenly, but deeply, like a tide pulling something hidden up from the sand. "You thought that?" Adrian asked. "All I ever got from you was books," she said. "Beautiful ones, but still books." He laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. "I didn't know how to give anything else." Eliza looked at him for a long time. "That's the problem with people like us," she said. "We feel too much and say too little." Days turned into weeks. They started meeting outside the shop. Walking along the coast. Sitting on old benches that had forgotten how many people had sat on them before. Eliza told him about the years she had been gone. About cities that were too loud. Jobs that felt like borrowed clothes. People she had known briefly and forgotten even faster. Adrian told her almost nothing about his years. Except the letters. Always the letters. One night, Eliza finally asked, "What did you write in them?" Adrian hesitated. "Things I couldn't say out loud," he admitted. "Things I thought would disappear if I didn't write them down." "Like what?" He stopped walking. Then said quietly, "You." Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they had never said before. Eliza turned toward the sea. The waves were restless, glowing faintly under the moonlight. "You know," she said, "I used to think love was supposed to be obvious. Loud. Certain. And now?" Adrian asked. "Now I think it's mostly just mistiming." That word stayed with him longer than anything else she had ever said. Winter came again. This time Eliza didn't disappear, but something else did. The certainty between them. Because knowing someone had loved you in silence is different from learning how to love them out loud. Sometimes it is harder. One evening, Eliza didn't come to the shop. Not the next day either. On the third day, Adrian walked to the bakery ruins. He found her sitting on the old steps, holding a book she hadn't opened. "I think I'm scared," she said without looking at him. "Of what?" "Of staying," she answered. "Because staying means it has to become real." Adrian sat beside her. "It already is real," he said quietly. Eliza shook her head. "No. Real things can break." He looked at her for a long time. "So can unreal things," he said. That night, they didn't kiss. They didn't confess anything new. That night, they didn't kiss. They didn't confess anything new. They simply sat together until the cold became unbearable, and even then neither of them moved first. Spring came again. And with it, change. Eliza reopened the bakery space, not as a bakery, but as a small reading cafe. She called it Second Chances, though she never said why. Adrian helped her. Slowly, quietly, like a man learning a new language. The box of letters stayed under the counter. But it was no longer closed. One day, a child visiting the cafe asked, "Why do you keep that box?" Eliza answered before Adrian could. "'Cause," she said, "some feelings need time to find their voice." Adrian looked at her then. And for the first time, he understood something important. That love was never only about saying the right words. It was about surviving long enough to say them at all. And somewhere between the silence they once lived in and the life they were building now, the letters stopped being things that were never sent. They became something else entirely. Proof that even silence can learn how to speak. The cafe called Second Chances slowly became part of the town's rhythm. At first, people came out of curiosity. A cafe inside an old bakery, run by a woman who preferred silence over advertising, and a man who still looked like he was thinking more than speaking. But gradually, they stayed. Because the place didn't feel like a business. It felt like something unfinished that had learned how to continue. Adrian and Eliza worked side by side, but never quite in sync at first. There were still pauses between them, small hesitations, moments where words almost happened but didn't. Love, they were learning, didn't fix the past. It only made it visible. One evening, after closing, Eliza stood behind the counter holding the old wooden box. "It's lighter," she said. Adrian looked up from sorting books. "It shouldn't be." She opened it. Inside, there were fewer letters now. Some had been taken out over time, read, and never returned. "People would think this is strange," she said. "Keeping all of this." "They already think we're strange," Adrian replied calmly. That made her smile. A real one this time. But something was changing again. Not between them, but inside them. Eliza had started receiving job offers from outside the town. Better opportunities. Bigger cities. The kind of future that didn't fit inside small streets and quiet mornings. One night, she placed the letter on the counter without speaking. Adrian understood immediately. "You're leaving," he said. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I might be." Silence followed, heavy but familiar. He nodded slowly. "I always thought this moment would hurt more," he admitted. Eliza looked at him. "Doesn't it?" "It does," he said after a pause. "Just not in the way I expected." That night, neither of them slept much. Adrian sat at the window of the shop, watching the sea the way he always did when he couldn't answer something inside himself. He thought about all the letters he had written. All the words that had once felt too dangerous to speak. And now, when he finally had the chance to speak them freely, he still didn't know how. The next morning, Eliza was gone. No dramatic goodbye. No final conversation. Just absence. The cafe door was locked. The bell didn't ring. And for the first time in a long time, Adrian didn't open the shop right away. He stood outside instead, holding something in his hand. A single letter. The last one. It was addressed simply, Eliza. Inside, there were only a few lines. "I used to think love was about holding on. Now I think it's about not turning someone into a cage. If you need to leave, I will not make you stay. But I want you to know something I never said properly while you were here: you were never a second chance. You were the first time I understood what living felt like." He didn't know if he would send it. He just held it. Like a memory that had finally learned how to breathe. Weeks passed. The cafe stayed closed. The town returned to its quieter version of itself, as if nothing had changed. But Adrian changed. He no longer wrote letters he never sent. Instead, he started writing things meant for no one in particular. Thoughts without addresses. Words that didn't need to arrive anywhere. For the first time, silence didn't feel like waiting. It felt like acceptance. And then, one autumn morning, a small envelope appeared under the door. No return address. Inside was a single page. Eliza's handwriting. "I didn't leave because I stopped caring. I left because I finally understood I was only alive when I was with you, and that scared me more than distance ever could. But I think I understand something now too. Love isn't supposed to feel like disappearing. I'm coming back. Not because I need to. Because I choose to." Adrian read it 3 times. Then sat down. And for a long time, he simply held the paper against his chest. Winter returned again, as it always did. But this time, the wind didn't feel empty.